Up to 50,000 new infections per day in China. What you can expect if you catch the coronavirus, and mass quarantine centers are being set up around the world right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Martinson here with your coronavirus update. It's February 6th, 2020. I've titled this one, What to Expect. Well, the first thing we can expect out of everything, of course, is that these numbers that are being reported are pure junk. I've been showing this model for a while. Not mine. I found it. Still looking for the person who originated this, but this model is clearly tracking what the official numbers were. So in yellow are the days that have gone by, and yesterday we had the 5th of February numbers reported, and here let's put them on. 27,571 is exactly what the model was predicting, 27,602, 99.9% closeness around that number. 576 was the predicted or modeled number, and 564 was the actual reported number. These are junk at this point in time, and we all know that, and this is pretty clear. So moving on, I got that 50,000 new infections per day. That is not me fear-mongering. That is me reporting what Professor Neil Ferguson, who works in an infectious disease modeling center, has reported that they are working with as their most probable number right now inside of China. Of course, that could change if the number goes up and is exponential. Really good work at Peak Prosperity in the comments under yesterday's video, where we had a statistician come in and run these numbers and look at these numbers and said, hey, this is weird because the actual best fit for this little math here is a quadratic fit, where what we would be expecting is an exponential increase. Those are two different functions. And so somebody has modeled out the reported numbers, and those are quadratics. They fit perfectly, 0.9999. I mean, it's just a great fit. And we're probably experiencing an exponential explosion in the number of cases. And that's why I don't have it here in this presentation, but maybe you've seen it. There are all these videos circulating now of these massive disinfecting machines running around in various cities in China, just spewing out who knows what, not bleach, I guess, but from these giant sort of water guns or look like snow guns on a ski slope. All right, lessons from the cruise ship. Of course, we've always been wondering just how infectious is this particular disease. There was a report that, again, I don't have here, but I could pull up for later, showing that reported that somebody thought they caught the disease after standing next to an infected person for about 15 seconds. That's out of China. But here on this cruise ship, we're up to 20 infected. That's out of 102 results that have come back out of 273 people tested. But the whole ship is on quarantine, and there's another whole ship under quarantine. And it just must be a nightmare for those poor people who are stuck on that. So I've heard a lot of reports, and people have come back. I'm very excited about the HIV protease inhibitor and the nucleotide disruptor cocktails. Those look like they could be really good. Questions, of course, again, still about how many of these drugs can be produced and at what scale and what time. That's very exciting. But I've had other people talk to me about the possibility of a vaccine. We just have to be, back up here. We have to be, I think, really clear-eyed about this. So here, it's going to take a long way to go. We heard a report that somebody managed to get a potential vaccine into animal testing a couple days ago. But again, animal testing is testing for a reason. It might work, it might not. And typically they don't. So even once you take it through animal testing, you still want to isolate and find the very best combination of vaccine particles that would confer the best immunological response and make sure it's effective and efficacious, all that stuff. So here's the punchline from this. It looks like that it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to be at least 12 to 18 months, which means in the acute situation we're in now, at least in China, will not create a benefit. So this is from Thomas Brewer, Chief Medical Officer of GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. So this sort of runs counter to that report that came out that the stocks allegedly vaulted higher yesterday on about the supposed breakthrough. Listen, stocks are vaulting higher because the central banks are pouring massive amounts of money in there so that everything will look okay. There's absolutely no possible explanation for example, Cathay Pacific is a airliner out of Hong Kong that slashed 30% of its routes and workforce, furloughed them, and their stock was up pretty good and green yesterday. So official support for the markets, but again, really as a signaling device to help spread the idea that everything's okay and under control. Running against that is just a simple search here on Google asking about quarantines. And this is just a screen grab. I didn't hunt and pack and assemble this. I just grabbed 5 articles that were in a row. So we've got compulsory quarantine of all arrivals on Hong Kong. That's happening all over the place. Vietnam is going to start quarantining people returning from China. Now, Vietnam, of course, has a border with China, probably a fairly porous border. And so this is going to be a big, big issue for Vietnam. The Pentagon has now approved 6 military bases for coronavirus quarantines. Camp Ashland might be one of those. So this is a National Guard camp near Ashland, Nebraska. Russians have started a 2-week coronavirus quarantine, on and on and on. There's many, many more stories like this. You get the point. And when we look at this, Vietnam isn't just setting up a quarantine. They're setting up field hospitals with thousands of beds to handle a potential influx of coronavirus cases. Of course, health officials don't set those up willy-nilly for no good reason. They must have a pretty legit concern that they could justify, because these are pretty expensive to set up field hospitals like that. And so that's what's happening right now. And of course, we can look back in the old pictures and say, this is during the Spanish flu. This is what it used to look like. They would just set up rows and rows and rows of these beds to try and manage and treat and house all of the sick people who are coming through. And as you can tell, maybe you have to squint a little bit, these people are using the best PPE, personal protective equipment they know how. They've all got face masks. They're wearing gowns. Who knows if they really understood how to wash and disinfect, but this is the best they could do. Today, we can do a lot better. This is how we're doing it now. It's a little sarcasm there. So same thing again. This is in Wuhan. They've set up this facility, thousands and thousands of beds. It looks like they're expecting and ready to quarantine people. In fact, the orders have come out in China now for people who are infected or might have been infected to show up to quarantine centers. And that's how they're going to begin to try and contain this, is at least see if they can get all the people who are sick or potentially sick in a room. Now, what happens if you do get sick? What I've tried to do here today is give you a sense of sort of the progression of the illness. First things first, I'm convinced that most people who get this illness some of them just have the sniffles. Well, let's talk the total disease spread. There is a whole bell curve of possible responses here. Some people, they're just naturally immune in their own way, or they get a very, very, very minor case. In fact, they might not even notice. And then you'll get the people who are getting a little bit ill, and it comes and it goes. You'll get the people who get more sick. These are people who are really feeling like they've got a full case of the flu. But then, unfortunately, it looks like up to 25% of the people who contract this, and again, really rough numbers, could be that that's really a much too high of a figure because we aren't counting all the people who got the equivalent of sniffles in that story. But it looks like a very, very significant number of people are getting seriously ill with this. And so once you do present to the hospital or you get a full-blown case, the question is, what's that experience like? So U.S. has its first patient has now been released from the hospital. That was on February 3rd. And so what I want to do is just step through what this person's experience was. This one actually got written up in the New England Journal of Medicine. And this case report doesn't follow all the way through to the release. I believe this travels most of the way through, but we get the early patient history on this. So here's the story. On January 19th, 2020, a 35-year-old man, he presents to an urgent care clinic in Snohomish County, and he had a 4-day history of cough and a subjective fever. So I guess we can say he first felt ill on January 15th. We don't know when he contracted this particular illness, probably early, 5 to 7 days earlier than that. But we can date this to January 15th. And so that's the date that he came back to Washington State after traveling a family visit to Wuhan, China. So this is what we know about this person so far. And here was their patient history. They traveled from China. They went to work for a couple days. They had a little fever, came to urgent care because suddenly they were going, maybe I've got this coronavirus thing. And then they had all these days in the hospital. You can see the fever on this line peaked out at 39.4 Celsius. They had a cough the whole way through, a little bit of runny nose, but only at the very end. Fatigue, of course, that's the flu. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. It's interesting that we see that the virus particles can be shed in both of those exudates, if we can call it that. A little bit of abdominal discomfort, and the nausea had 2 periods. Now, if we follow this case history a little bit further, what's interesting about this, notice that hospital urgent care, then this is hospital day 1. So was already feeling fever, came to hospital day 1. It's like day 5 of this experience for this person. Okay, that'll be important in a moment. So a chest radiograph taken on day 3, so that was illness, day 7, showed no evidence of infiltrates or abnormalities, so no pneumonia. Now that's the thing that's really the chief complicating factor with this that's really doing people in and killing them is the pneumonia. However, a second chest radiograph from the night of hospital day 5 showed evidence of pneumonia in the lower lobe of the left lung. And on day 6, they started this patient on supplemental oxygen because their O2 levels were dropping as low as 90% saturation in the blood levels. And they started them here with vancomycin, a big 1,750 milligram dose to get started, a gram every 8 hours after that. So that's what happened. So actually, and they cleared up on hospital day 8. So we have to put one more line on this chart that they didn't include for some reason, which is pneumonia, which started here on day 3 of the hospital, right here, and progressed through to day 8. And what I want to convey to you, though, is that they caught this thing way back here somewhere, and they were sick for all of this time. And here's where the trouble started. It wasn't out here until what we might call day 7 of the illness. Or later. It might have been, we don't know exactly when they got sick, but let's use this as a timeline. So day 7. So if we put this on a calendar, we might say, okay, they really first contacted authorities and said, I think I'm ill around here. They were hospitalized on the 19th. The pneumonia starts about here, and they were just discharged here. So if they were in the hospital, what are we looking at? 1, 2, 2.5 weeks, something like that. It's a really long stay. And maybe, with an abundance of caution, this person was in for a couple extra days longer than they had to be. But this is just sort of a case history that's worth noting because we've got a lot of data around it. We have slightly less data around this one, but it's still interesting. And this is the California husband and wife. They were infected with the coronavirus. He caught it. He gave it to his wife. So that was a human-to-human transmission outside of China. If I have this story right, he traveled to China. But she didn't. But he came back and gave it to his wife. Now, this couple, I can't find when they might have contracted it. There's not a single article I was able to surface after searching about 10 that explained when exactly this gentleman was in China, when he came back, any of that. All we know for sure is that they had been reportedly self-isolating in their home since January 24th, both said to be 57 years old. Maybe that's relevant. Because what happened next was they had to go back into the hospital and they had to check themselves in. And that was here on February 4th. So I'll get that highlighted for you here, February 4th. So if we put them on a chart, we find out that they are self-isolating here on the 24th, and they're doing this for all this time, right? And I don't know how sick they were or where they contracted it. And it's not here till the 4th that they hospitalized. They get hospitalized with more serious complications. So assuming they were sick and self-isolating because they knew they had the illness here, that is a full 1, 2 plus 7 is 9, 10, 11. That's 12 days later. So here we went from about, almost a week from presenting with the illness to pneumonia onsetting. This is a lot more time. 11 days later, maybe 12, depending on how you count. So that just shows that this illness, when you do get it, if you're going to get it, the actual worst part of it that you have to be afraid of is 7 or more days out in front of you. And that has a lot of implications for how you might want to track it, if you're self-treating at home, if it ever comes to that, if you want to really understand how long you might have to prepare to be in the medical care system or under care. I think we're starting to get a handle on that based on these sorts of case studies. One more for you, very sad case. All of them are sad cases, but this one was around the Chinese doctor who first sounded the alarm on the Wuhan coronavirus, has reportedly died. That's coming out today on February 6th. And again, we don't know exactly when this person got contracted the disease, but we know that he was hospitalized on January 12th after contracting the virus from one of his patients. Confirmed. They didn't run the test, confirmed to have had the coronavirus on February 1st, but that's not where we date the disease from. So he's hospitalized on January 12th, dies on February 6th. So if we put this person on, We find out that here they are being hospitalized here. They spent all this time in the hospital, 3 weeks, plus a good chunk of another week before they passed away. Have no clue of the progression of the disease, don't know exactly when the pneumonia might have set in, but the bottom line of putting these 3 case studies together that I want you to be aware of is that these are all showing that once you contract the disease, the worst is still in front of you. Once you present with the symptoms, the worst can still be in front of you. So for the people who do progress to pneumonia, 7 to 12 to, oh my gosh, what is this, 20 plus days later? That's sort of the disease progression. So it means that it's a big, long slog. This is why the hospitals are getting overwhelmed. Having somebody who's in a pneumonic state, and if you read, is very, very difficult to treat. Lots of interventions if you're going to do it well. I mean, they're monitoring all different sorts of blood levels and oxygen levels and trying different compounds and getting you on antibiotics, and there's Ringer's lactate and other hydration, and maybe you have to be intubated and you're on ventilation, all kinds of things. With those heavy interventions, of course, that's a very exhaustive process to carry for one patient, let alone if you have hundreds or thousands of patients. All right, the conclusion here is that, honestly, I truly believe this. Most likely, if you're a healthy person, you're just going to experience mild to moderate symptoms. But there's a pretty high complication rate on this. It seems to be, so far, hitting males harder than females, potentially people of certain races, Asians harder than non-Asians, and as well, because I might mention that all 12 people who caught this in Germany, and again, I don't know the races, I'm just projecting here, but all of them had relatively minor cases and were released without too much difficulty. But if you do get one of these serious complications, and that may be, we don't know how many, up to 20%, the NIH thought 25%, it's going to be a 2 to 3 week hospital stay under rigorous care. And that's a real concern if this thing goes epidemic across other countries. Of course, a pandemic is just an epidemic in 2 or more countries. So we really got to watch this. It looks pretty serious at this point. And if we look at this disease progression, the first few days, kind of like a bad cold or a flu, but things can then take a turn for the worse, usually about a week in, might be 2 weeks, but it's out there. And this is going to be pneumonia. And of course, you're looking for shortness of breath. You're looking for, difficulty breathing. You're looking for, lung pain, things like that. The actions of the authorities at this point, setting up those massive field hospitals all over the place and implementing quarantine procedures and all of that, I think that tells you everything you need to know. Please don't watch the stock market as a indicator as whether everything's fine or not. Please don't listen to any more journalists out there trying to tell you this is no worse than the flu. This thing is for real. It's a lot worse than the flu, and you deserve access to the real information around that. That's all I have for today. We'll talk to you again soon. See you later.